Hello friends, this video on tissues part 5 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Let us now see permanent tissue in little more detail. So as I mentioned before, permanent tissues are those tissues which do not have the ability to divide. Right? In one of the previous slides, I explained clearly that when the meristematic cells divide, the new cells which are formed, some of them stay within the meristem, some of them are thrown out away from the meristem. So those cells which are thrown out, they are known as differentiated cells, and those differentiated cells, when they mature, their characteristic changes and they become permanent tissue. So these permanent tissues, now as I said, they do not divide. They do not have the capacity to divide. But still they are present. That means they also perform some specific function. So these permanent tissues have a very specific function to perform. No ability to divide. That is the most important thing which distinguishes these kind of tissues from meristematic tissues. They are termed as permanent tissue as they have permanent shape, size and function, which is very, very important, right? Because when we talk of meristematic tissue, what do we see? Their main function is growth because they divide, correct? But in case of permanent tissue, they cannot divide. So they cannot help the plant in its growth, but they have got a specific function to perform. And that function, let us suppose, for example, let us take this example. Suppose there are 50 students in your class. Okay. Now you have assigned the function of say, as I was mentioning that time, the celebration of Teachers' Day, and you have assigned the function, the job of organizing the cultural program to a particular boy named Ram. So Ram has been assigned the job of looking at the cultural activity, and it is his permanent job. That means anytime there is a function at school, maybe it is annual day celebration or Teachers' Day celebration or farewell or whatever it is, his job is always to look after the cultural events which are being organized, right? So that means he has a specific function to perform every time. So similarly, these permanent tissues also have a permanent function. They have a permanent shape and size, and that is why they are known as permanent tissue. Now, process by which cells formed by meristematic tissue become a permanent tissue is known as differentiation. Just now I was mentioning about it, that when they divide, the meristematic cells divide, some of the new cells, they are thrown away from the meristem, right? So those cells are known as differentiated cells, right? And those differentiated cells, those cells are called derivatives. So they are called derivatives, and these derivatives actually, when they mature, they form permanent tissue. Now the process by which these derivatives become permanent tissue, that process is known as differentiation. Correct? So permanent tissue, the origin of permanent tissue is again meristematic tissue only, because meristematic tissue only gives rise to some cells which they throw out of the meristem, and those cells are called derivatives which later become permanent tissue. Clear? So now let us look at the various types of permanent tissue. So we were talking about a permanent function which a permanent tissue perform, correct? So let us look at the different types of permanent tissue, and let us also see what are the specific functions performed by each type of permanent tissue. Now broadly, permanent tissue are classified into two types, that is simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. So this is the broad classification. Now again, simple permanent tissue is classified into four types, that is parenchyma, Collenchyma, Sclerenchyma and epidermis. So these are the categories these are the tissues which fall under the category of simple permanent tissue. Similarly, complex permanent tissue is again classified into two types, that is xylem and phloem. I'm sure that at the first time when you hear these names, they sound really weird and you feel that how am I going to remember these names? But As we start learning about each of them, try to understand them, try to correlate their names with their function, with their purpose, so that it becomes easier for you to remember things, right? Because biology has lot to remember. I mean, there are a lot of things which you need to remember in biology, right? So it is always good that you try to correlate the terms with something, either with its structure or with its function. With something you make some resemblance, so that it becomes easier for you to remember things, right? So now I am just telling you the types here. Now in our next slides we will start understanding each of these tissues one by one. So let us start with simple permanent tissue. So what is a simple permanent tissue? As the name says simple, that means it is going to be something simple. So the tissues which are made up of similar type of cells. So that means all the cells are similar. That is why it is simple tissue. There is no complication at all. It is not that some cell is like that, some cell is like something else. No complication at all. All the cells are similar. So they are simple permanent tissue. So when you think of examples of simple permanent tissue, these are the examples of some simple permanent tissue when you observe them under microscope. So right now you might be thinking, what are these actually? Right? But as we go ahead, we will learn about the different types of simple permanent tissue. Then we will see what exactly each of these tissues indicate. So now let us talk about the types of simple permanent tissue. So the first one was parenchyma. So under simple permanent tissue, you will have all the chymas: parenchyma, Collenchyma, Sclerenchyma. So they all fall under simple permanent tissue. So what is a parenchyma? So this is obviously a simple permanent tissue. It is the basic packing tissue. What do I mean by basic packing tissue? That means the tissue which forms the base of all plants, right? So it is the basic packing tissue which actually makes up the base of the plant. They are unspecialized live cells. Unspecialized means they are not specialized to perform a specific function. Their permanent function is to form the base. So they are the basic packing tissue. They have thin cell walls, large intercellular spaces. That means the cells in a parenchyma tissue are not very closely packed. They do have intercellular spaces. So they look somewhat like this. So here if you see, they have got small intercellular spaces, right? So these are the cells which you see here. So these are the cells and these are the spaces between them, which are the intercellular spaces. So these parenchyma cells form the basic packing tissue without much specialization, but they are live cells. Correct? Okay. So what is its function? So this was the description of the parenchyma cell, parenchyma tissue. The function is provide support to plants, stores food, stores nutrients and water. So if you look at it, it performs some of the very important and basic functions, right? Without food, the plant cannot survive, right? Now, even if the plant is preparing its food, it needs a place where it can store the food so that it can be used whenever needed, right? For example, in our home also, we do have kitchen where we have so many containers to store things. Even though we cook food and we eat it immediately, but still we will keep things for storage so that we can use them whenever, as and when needed, right? So storage is important. So in plants, the parenchyma performs as the storage of food. It stores the food, nutrients and water, and so that it can supply them to the plants as and when needed. And obviously it provides support to the plants because it forms the basic tissue. Therefore it definitely provides support to the plants. Now, even under parenchyma, we do have different types of parenchyma, right? So these types have little modification on the same parenchyma, but they have been given different names. So what are the types which fall under parenchyma? So the first type is Collenchyma. Now, as the name says, Collenchyma. Chloro, it is derived from the term chloro. So parenchyma with chlorophyll. So I'm sure all of you are aware of what is chlorophyll. You all must be knowing what is photosynthesis. It is a process by which plants prepare their own food in presence of sunlight. So the pigment which plays a very important role in photosynthesis is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a green colored pigment which is present in plants, because of the presence of which the leaves are green in color. So chlorophyll is a green colored pigment. So parenchyma, that means there are certain kind of tissues which actually contain this green pigment, right? Because the pigment is present inside the plant. That means it is present in some tissue only. So the tissue which contains chlorophyll, that is known as Sclerenchyma. It helps in photosynthesis. The second type is Parenchyma. So again, Parenchyma is derived from the word air. Air means, whenever you think of air, what comes to your mind? That means empty spaces, right? Let us suppose when you are staying in a congested room, what do you feel like? You say that I'm not getting air, I'm feeling suffocated. So you want to come out of the room and you want to be in free air, so that you get that emptiness. Similarly, Parenchyma. What are Parenchyma? These are parenchyma with air cavities in aquatic plants. So that means it will have big empty cavities, that means big empty spaces which will have only air, right? So here if you look at the picture where it shows Parenchyma, these big open spaces, they are not the cells. Here these were the cells and these small spaces were the intercellular spaces. But here the small bubbles like structure which you see here, these are the cells, and the big space is the air cavity. So that means it will have more of air cavities, and it is generally present in aquatic plants, because aquatic plants spend most of their time in water. So in order to give them some air, these big air cavities are present in their tissues. So it helps in floating, because for aquatic plants floating is an important aspect. So this Parenchyma helps in floating, right? So I mean, in case you have any confusion regarding the types of plant tissues, let us quickly look at the classification once again. So what did I say? Plant tissues are classified into two types, that is meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. So right now we are concentrating on permanent tissue. So permanent tissue is divided into two types, that is simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. This simple permanent tissue is divided into types like parenchyma, Collenchyma, Sclerenchyma. Again, this parenchyma has two types, that is Sclerenchyma and Parenchyma, right? So now it is clear, the picture is clear to you. So what did we study in parenchyma? It is the simple packing tissue. Its function is to provide support and also to store food, nutrients and water. It has two types, Sclerenchyma, which helps in photosynthesis because it has chlorophyll, and the other one is Parenchyma, which helps in floating for aquatic plants because it has air cavities. Let us now look at the next type, that is Collenchyma. So what is Collenchyma? So parenchyma, you can remember the name, it is packing tissue. So packing tissue is parenchyma. So PP matching, packing tissue, parenchyma, right? Now let us talk about Collenchyma. So this is the tissue which is responsible for flexibility in plants. So what do I mean by flexibility in plants? So what do I mean when I say flexibility in plants? Now you would have seen that in a plant there are certain portions which can be moved. Which has flexibility. For example, some of the bending parts of a plant, for example the leaf, you can bend the leaf, you can twist and turn the leaf without breaking, unless and until you do not put a lot of force on it, right? Or even for the stem, you can bend it, even if there is a wind, it can bend without breaking, right? So all these things happen because it has flexibility. Because if it doesn't have flexibility, in that case it will not bend or it will not twist, right? So the tissue which is responsible for flexibility in plants is Collenchyma. So how does the structure of this tissue look like? So it looks like something like this, where it is a supporting and strengthening tissue. So obviously it provides support because it allows it to bend, but at the same time doesn't break it. So it is a supporting and strengthening tissue. It has elongated leaving cells. So in parenchyma, the tissue was mainly a packing tissue, right? But here it is supporting and strengthening tissue with elongated leaving cells. Irregularly thickened at corners. So here the cells are thickened at corners. So if you see, these are the cells. This is one cell. So if you see the wall thickenings, this red colored things, they are nothing but the thickenings at the walls. So if you see, their walls are irregularly thickened at corners. Less intercellular spaces. So in this case, if you look at it, the tissues are the cells are quite closely packed to each other. This is one cell, this is one cell, this is one cell, this is one cell. So if you look at it, the 4 cells are quite tightly packed to each other, and there are no spaces left for intercellular spaces, right? So here these big holes or these white structures, these are nothing but vacuoles, and these are the cell walls. The outer lining, that is the cell wall, this is vacuole, this is a nucleus. So this is a plant cell. So these cells are closely packed, so less intercellular spaces, irregularly thickened at corners. These are elongated leaving cells, supporting and strengthening tissue, and they provide flexibility in plants. So where are they found? They are found in the leaf stalks below epidermis. So what is epidermis? Epidermis is like the skin of the plant, the outer layer of the plant. So if you look at the leaf stalks below the epidermis, that means these leaf stalks. So these are the leaf stalks. So it is present here. It is present in expanded leaves. So even in the leaves it is present. As I mentioned, you can twist and turn the leaf because the leaf has some flexibility. The stem apex, the tip of the stem, because in this, for the stem also you can, there is a flexibility in the stem, right? But at the same time, if you look at the root, there is not much flexibility in root. So it is not that all parts of the plant have got flexibility. Only the parts where this tissue, that is collenchyma, which is responsible for flexibility, is present, only there you can find some flexibility. So what is its function? It allows bending of stems and leaves without breaking, provides mechanical support. So these are some of the functions. So support is a function which is mostly common to most of the plant tissues because plant needs lots of mechanical support, right? Now other than that, this collenchyma tissue, it allows the bending of stems and leaves, which in turn shows that it gives some flexibility in plants. So here if you look at this picture which is shown here, this actually displays a collenchyma tissue. This is how it looks like when it is viewed under a microscope. So if you see, the cells are quite closely packed to each other, not much intercellular spaces between them, right? They are also thickened at the corners. So if you see their corners, they are quite thickened there, right? Okay, so that was all about collenchyma. So let us now talk about the third type, that is sclerenchyma. So what is sclere? So we saw that parenchyma is the packing tissue. So basic packing is done by parenchyma. Collenchyma will give the flexibility part. Now let us see, what does a sclerenchyma do? The tissue which is responsible for stiffness in plants. So first we talked about the basic thing, then we talked about flexibility. Now we are talking about stiffness. That means there are certain portions of the plants which are very hard and very stiff. So those stiffness is caused by this tissue called sclerenchyma. So they have long, narrow and dead cells. Now why do they have dead cells? Because they are only for stiffness. So they do not need much of the nutrients or much of the food. So they just want dead cells which should provide good support so that it can provide stiffness. Thickened cell walls made of cellulose. So now here you want even stronger cells. So the cell walls should be very thick, right? In case of collenchyma also, the cell walls were little bit thickened because there also you wanted to provide some support to the plants, right? So the more stiffness you want, the stronger the cell walls should be. So here the cell walls are thickened and they are made up of cellulose. So the thickened cell walls made up of cellulose is impregnated with lignin. So what is lignin? Now, lignin is a chemical substance which acts like cement and hardens the cell walls. So that's what I was telling, right? That if it is for stiffness, so the more stiffness you want, the cells should be more well protected. So that means the cell walls should be more hard. Now, in order to make the cell walls rough and tough, to harden the cells, what is done? It is added with a chemical called lignin. So lignin is the chemical substance which will make the cell walls hard, right? Even the name Sclerenchyma is derived from the word sclerose. The word sclerose means hard. So that is how you can remember Sclerenchyma. Parenchyma, how will you remember? Packing tissue parenchyma, right? Similarly, for Sclerenchyma, the word sclerose it means hard. So Sclerenchyma is for providing hardness and stiffness in plants. Now, these Sclerenchyma cells, when they are young, they are living, but by the time they get matured, they become dead cells. So initially, as I mentioned here, that they are dead cells because on maturity they are dead cells. But initially, when they are young, they are also living cells. Now, simple pits are present in the thickened cell. So the cell walls which are thickened with lignin, they have simple pits. What are simple pits? They are nothing but canal-like structure which helps in transportation. So if you look at this figure, you will understand what is simple pits. So here if you see, these are the cells and these are this pink colored structure. They are the cell walls, the thick cell walls, thick and hard cell walls. Now even in the cell walls, if you see, there is a small gap kind of a thing, right? So it is a small canal-like structure. So these structures are known as simple pits and they help in the transportation of materials from one cell to another. So it basically helps in the communication between two cells, right? So no intercellular spaces because they are closely packed with each other. Again, here also we have two types of Sclerenchyma cells. So what are the two types of cells? Sclerids and fibers. So these are not the types of Sclerenchyma tissue. The Sclerenchyma tissue is again made up of cells, right? So it is made up of two types of cells. One is called sclerids and the other one is called fibers. So these two kind of cells actually make the Sclerenchyma tissue, right? So I hope you are clear with what is Sclerenchyma. So now the question is, where are they found? Now if they provide stiffness, where exactly do we see such stiff things in plants? They are found in the hard covering of seeds and nuts. If you think of these kind of seeds like the coconut, so you see the outer covering of the coconut, how hard it is, right? Similarly, if you look at this dry fruits, there are certain dry fruits which have got very hard covering, right? This one, we call them as akhrot, right? So these kind of dry fruits, their covering also is very hard, or even the nuts. So they have hard covering. So it is present in the hard covering of seeds and nuts, in the veins of the leaves. So if you look at a leaf, the veins which you have, they are quite hard. The middle vein which you see, or the stronger veins which come alongside. So those veins are also quite hard. So it is present in the veins of the leaves. It is also found in stems around vascular bundles. Now what is vascular bundle? You might be wondering now. Now vascular bundle is something which we will talk about in detail as we go ahead. So vascular bundles are nothing but complex tissues. It falls under the category of complex permanent tissue. So there are the stems of the plants which are around vascular bundles. They are also very hard. So there also we have Sclerenchyma. So what is the function of Sclerenchyma? Since its function is to provide stiffness, so it also provides support, so provides strength to the plants, provides mechanical support, right? So providing support is the main purpose of Sclerenchyma cell, because even though they are dead on maturity, they provide structural support to the plants. Correct? So now we have finished our discussion on all the types of simple permanent tissue, that is parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. So let us have a quick comparison between the three types of simple permanent tissue, that is parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. Now when we talk about cells, so the cells in parenchyma is living, cells in collenchyma is also living, but in sclerenchyma the cells are living when they are young but they become dead on maturity. Next is intercellular spaces. In case of parenchyma, it is quite noticeable intercellular spaces. In collenchyma, it is lesser and it is absent totally in case of sclerenchyma. Because see, the more the intercellular space, the lesser is the stiffness, right? Let us suppose if you have a box. If in that box you put 10 balls inside that box, such even though the box can carry 20, but you put 10 balls inside it, what will happen? When you move that box, the balls will keep moving here and there. So there will be a lot of empty space, and because of which it will be loosely packed. So the things will move here and there. So the stiffness will be less. Right? But if they are very closely packed, let us suppose if it can contain 20 balls and you have somehow entered 21 balls, now it will be like total compact and hard. The balls will not be able to move here and there, right? So the same thing happens here. In parenchyma, we have lot of intercellular spaces. That is why it is not that stiff and hard. But in case of sclerenchyma, there is no intercellular spaces at all, and that is why they are compact, hard and rigid. Correct? Okay, now let us look at the cell wall. In case of parenchyma, it is thin. In collenchyma, it is irregularly thickened at corners, and in sclerenchyma, it is thickened with lignin. So here also, if you see, the thickness is increasing, because the greater the thickness of the cell wall, the more rigid or the more hard the tissue is. Function. When I talk of parenchyma, it is the packing tissue. It helps in photosynthesis in leaves and storage of food. Which kind of parenchyma helps in photosynthesis? The parenchyma with chlorophyll, that is called Collenchyma, right? What is the function of sclerenchyma? It provides flexibility, because of which bending of stems or bending of leaves is possible. And sclerenchyma, the purpose is stiffness, support and protection, because they are so strong and hard that they can provide stiffness. At the same time, they can protect the plant also, right? So with this, I think we will end our discussion on simple permanent tissue. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.